Services Marketing, MKT 625, Lecture number 16.
Assalamu alaikum Khawateen Hazrat. This is Wasim Hassan, your instructor for the course Services Marketing MKT 625 at the Virtual University of Pakistan. I welcome you to lecture number 16. You know very well that we have entered a new phase of learning, which is all about minimizing the gap number 1 of the levels of expectations. We need to do that because we have entered a very strategic mode, and the rest of the course is going to be all about filling up different gaps. And you also know that there are 4 different levels, and we have just started talking about the first level. Experts contend that this level of gap exists because there's a gap between what management thinks customers want and what customers actually want. They say that the management like to think that this should be the case with the customers, whereas it is not what customers do want. And therefore, we need to minimize that gap if we cannot fully close it. Experts also contend that this gap occurs because the management people generally maintain a distance between themselves and the customers. Meaning, in other words, in marketing terminology, they're not close to the customer. When they are not close to the customer, when they're not having direct interactions with the customers by way of informal conversations or focus groups and things like that, the inevitable result is the gap that I'm talking about. Let me give you a brief recap of the last segment of the previous lecture in that connection. You will recall that providers have 3 strategic options at their disposal, and by exercising those strategic options, providers think they are close to the customer, and by getting close to the customer, they are in a better position to fully understand their requirements and hence come up with something which is exactly what they want. But that hardly ever is the case because of certain variables that we have been talking about all along the course, and those are the characteristics of services marketing. Because of the variability factor, it is hardly ever possible to fully eliminate that gap, and therefore there is much more than the strategic options that providers have at the disposal that they need to do in order to minimize that gap. Now, what are those options? Let me again count those very briefly for you. The one is the segmentation area, by going into which providers think that they are in a position to collect right information about people who think alike, who have similar kind of preferences, and whose likes and dislikes are very similar to each other. They get into the demographic and psychographic profiles of the total need group and get to the conclusion that their findings about all those features are so relevant that there's no question of a gap coming up. But still, the gap comes up because of the fact that customization in services plays a very significant role. And you will also recall that the customization is something which is not present in case of tangible goods, because all those goods are manufactured in a manufacturing facility which are very identical, and there's no way that you can bring about any change after the goods are made. But this is not the case with services, and many people within the same segment having a similar need might come up with so many different kinds and sets of requirements. There's an array of requirements which different customers within the same need group might exhibit to the challenge of service providers. And service providers, in response to that, have to come up with services which match with those varying requirements. So this is something that providers could have to understand with a deeper insight, and that is something which dictates the importance of marketing research. The second option which they have at their disposal is that of relationship marketing, which is a very logical step in the right direction in order to be close to the customer and then concluding what his requirements are. You can do that on individual basis because you develop relationships on individual basis, and especially when you are in a B2B kind of situation, you certainly can pinpoint those requirements. But then again, because of the variability, certain changes take place, and at the end of the day, what you see is a gap. And again, the importance of marketing research, even in this kind of a scenario, cannot be emphasized. It is so very much important that we just cannot afford to live without that. The third option which the service providers could have to themselves is of recovery. And recovery definitely is a function of the variability. Because of the variations that take place while you render service to your customers, you have to stage recovery. And by applying different kinds of recovery strategies, what you do is you basically go for a damage control exercise. Now, if you are successful in controlling the damage, you are a successful service provider. But in the first place, you've got to make an effort toward a direction that there is no need for recovery. Unless it is inevitable, you should go for recovery. And like I said, there is no company which is immune from variability. And having seen variability creeping into all kinds of services and industries all across the world, we cannot assume that we do not need recovery strategies. All I'm saying is that we should deal with recovery strategies only when it is inevitable, meaning we've got to see to it that our processes and procedures are highly standardized and our behavior as providers should be very consistent. We should be good at playing our script and role and so on and so forth, and also should be able to have our customers play their roles very consistently so that the delivery of the service is termed as quality delivery. Now, the goal of understanding requirements and expectations of customers cannot be achieved unless we get into marketing research, because service providers could have to deal with so many different facets of requirements. It becomes very important that we carry out research in order to unearth so many different dimensions and angles of those requirements. We've got to look into the features as customers view from their point of view. We've got to look at very analytically the delivery mechanism, the way customers prefer it, and we've got to look at so many other attributes that customers think are preferable. And therefore, the importance of marketing research can be hardly overemphasized. How do we carry out these research, and what are the criteria for carrying out the right kind of research is going to be the topic of discussion during this lecture. But before I talk about that, let me tell you that there could be so many different objectives for carrying out research, only because of the fact that service providers deal with so many different angles and dimensions of requirements. At one particular stage, you maybe want to find out the need for having a fast food restaurant in one particular area, so that you are trying to unearth one particular need that needs to be satisfied, that needs to be fulfilled. On the other hand, once you have that restaurant, you need to carry out research in terms of finding out their preferences, meaning customers' likes and dislikes, as to what is it that they like about the food quality, about the nature of service, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying is, at different stages of business, you are supposed to be carrying out different kinds of research studies in order to stay ahead of competition, and in order to stay in a very close contact with your customers, so that you can determine for yourselves that you are on the right track, that you are carrying out strategies which are working to the favor of the company and to the benefit of the customer. Now, in order to achieve all these the different kinds of objectives, we ask ourselves as providers different kinds of questions. Or the other way of saying this is that these questions get translated into objectives. What could be these objectives of research? Let me talk about these one by one, and then I will be getting into detail of the dynamics of these objectives, why these are important, and what kind of research we can carry out in order to fulfill these objectives. Well, number one objective could be that we want to discover exact customer requirements and expectations. And the fact is that this is the essence of the whole course. And in order to find that out, we get into all those things that we have learned so far. And we are going to learn in the forthcoming lectures. I'll be getting into details of this particular factor from time to time, lecture to lecture. Let me talk about the second objective, which is identification of dissatisfied customers. Now, identifying dissatisfied customers is of utmost importance because of the reasons that we know fully well by now. We have to have criteria of evaluation on part of the customer in our mind, meaning what are the factors or what are the elements that customers like to evaluate when they are looking into the satisfaction factor, when they're looking into the quality factor, meaning that they think to themselves that they have bought a service of quality and therefore they stand satisfied. That is the essence of this very objective. So what I'm saying is that the company has got to be in a position to identify dissatisfied customers. And you can identify dissatisfied customers by talking with customers informally, but then you cannot talk with so many different customers informally on a one-on-one basis. You've got to have a certain mechanism, meaning a research mechanism in place whereby you can identify those dissatisfied customers. And you know the importance of bringing those dissatisfied customers back into the fold of satisfied customers. It is not only dissatisfied customers, it also is those customers who fall within that zone of indifference. And you also have to make sure that those customers who are satisfied customers but have a lesser chance of coming back to the company to buy the service again also have to be made loyal customers so that they get into that repeat cycle of purchases and come back to the company again and again buying that service. So the objective of research is to identify all those kinds of customers in a very structured way so that you can find out what really went wrong that led them toward dissatisfaction. And when you are into your own business or working for a company, you know the dynamics of your own company, your objectives, the vision and mission of the company, and you also understand fully well the interplay of the competitive forces, and therefore you should be in a position to ask yourselves the right kind of questions before you come up with a very well structured questionnaire. And you do seek help of marketing research companies for this particular purpose. Well, coming to the third objective, which marketing services providers must keep in the mind, they must track company performance. When I talk about company performance as an objective, which should be fulfilled by way of marketing research, I'm not talking about the financial side of it. There is a way for each and every company of the world to look at the end of the month, at the end of a quarter, and at the end of the year, the financial performance. And financials certainly are very good leads into seeing where the company is heading. But by the time you look at the financials, it may be a bit too late in the day. You know why? Because you don't know how your strategies are working until the time financials really portray the very dismal kind of a picture. Then you think to yourselves that there has to be something drastically wrong with the strategic movement of the company, and therefore the results have not presented themselves the way they should have. But performance of the company basically means, in the context of marketing research, all those strategic moves which companies make from time to time in order to make sure that the delivery of the service is all right and the features of the service which we are offering our customers are right, and whatever ways and means that we have at our disposal to deliver that service while we are having encounters are up to the mark. And it is of so much importance that this is something which must precede our, as service providers, looking into the financials. Because, like I said, this is the only way that you can feel the pulse, or you can have the pulse of the marketing forces. and all the dynamics that are playing against each other when it comes to the competitive makeup of the marketplace. And therefore, the performance of the company is something that has to be gauged with the help of marketing research, again, by asking the very pertinent kind of questions, and the questions can be well structured in terms of so many different variables that we've learned so far. I mean, we know how customers evaluate the factors of quality and satisfaction, and how they evaluate the delivery, the mechanism, and what is it that really builds up their levels of the different kinds of expectations. And therefore, we should be able to ask the right kinds of the questions to our customers. The other objective could be that we should assess individual performance. Now, individual performance is something which is carried out by each and every company of the world. May that be into services, or may that be into tangible goods marketing. The reason that we are talking about assessing the performance of individuals, because individuals, or for that matter people, are an extremely vital variable of the marketing mix for services. Do not lose sight of the 3 P's that we talked in relation to additions and adaptations, meaning people, processes, and physical evidence. People are so very important because they take the lead in exercising the processes, implementing the processes which are meant for the delivery of the service. The whole delivery mechanism that depends on people. It is not the manufacturing process, not the assembly line, which is very different from the variable that I'm talking about. So assessment of performance of people that takes on an added significance in the light that we do not want variability that does creep into the systems and procedures of services. And therefore, people, meaning the quality people, takes on an added importance. We've got to analyze and assess how different people are behaving during different encounters, so that we really can identify the star performers and differentiate those from those who are just average or not so good. And only by identifying those performers we can keep them motivated into giving a better service of quality to our customers. So therefore, we've got to be in a position to come up with a questionnaire which asks our customers about the encounters, about their perceptions of the behavior which was exhibited by the frontline providers of the company. The other objective could be ascertaining the actual gap. Well, this again is just like the objective of trying to find out the exact requirements and expectations of customers, because this also is something which is the essence of the whole course. But nevertheless, we've got to have a mechanism in place whereby we can measure the perceptions of our customers as against their expectations, and then come up with a gap in numerical form. And the fact is that there is a standardized kind of a way which has become universal and is used by so many different companies all across the globe. So we should look into this criterion very carefully, and also the research method to exercise this very criterion. Let us now talk about the other objective, which is an important objective for services, and that is we have to gauge effectiveness of changes and the recovery strategies. You will recall why do we need to have recovery strategies in place? Because we made certain mistakes and we want to go for a damage control exercise. When we go for that exercise, in the process, we might also bring about certain changes and improvements. As a matter of fact, when we look at our own delivery mechanism in a very self-examining way, we certainly are bound to come up with certain improvements, as long as we look at the whole thing without any bias and very objectively, introspectively, we look into the issue at hand and come up with certain process improvements. And those internal process improvements are the ones which, again, have to be tested. And those can be tested only if we carry out some kind of marketing research in order to make sure that the initiatives which we intend taking towards satisfaction of our customers are just about the right initiatives. And for that, we need to carry out market research. Another objective could be determining expectations for a new service or changed features. Well, this is something in which takes us back into the area of brand management and the general marketing management. If we are looking into a new service or new features of a service, that is just like talking about a new model of a tangible good. So just like we like to introduce new models of tangible goods, we like to have new features for our services. And similarly, we like to go for certain extensions of the brand that already exists and a brand which is a successful brand. So whether we are coming up with a new model or we are considering certain extensions, we need to carry out marketing research in order to make sure that the moves that we intend taking are going to be compatible with the expectations of our customers. So again, the importance of marketing research. You will agree with me that it amounts to groping in the dark if we think that by the virtue of experience that we have, that we can take these initiatives and that we shall be taught on the expectations of our customers. No, we can go wrong. And the ones that we have allocated resources in the right direction, our efforts are going to be misguided. And we shall get into the proverbial derailment of the company and derailment of the objectives, because then we are going to be miles and miles away from our objectives. We just cannot fulfill those. So never leave anything in marketing, and more so in services marketing, to chance and guesses and estimates. You've got to get into a structured research, and by having a well-planned program, you must try to find out all that you talk about as marketing managers. Another objective could be that we must monitor changing expectations within the industry. Now, why is it that the expectations change within the industry? Well, this owes to the changing and improving technology. As we are living in present day's world, we see the improvements in information technology. And it all owes to the improvements in information technology that there's so many different concepts and supports to and for services marketing have come to the surface. And the fact is that so many different supports wouldn't have been around if information technology had not presented itself the way that it has. So the changes which take place in the marketplace, because of the intense competition, because of the changing technologies, and because of the strong desire on part of all the providers to improve their services with the application of that technology, it becomes incumbent on providers to look into the changes that have been caused by this particular factor, meaning changes and improvements in technology which can have implications for customers' expectations. And we've got to gauge those, again, with the help of marketing research. We must gauge and assess what are the changes which already have taken place and changes which are in the offing and may take place pretty soon. They're around the corner, and therefore we've got to prepare ourselves to come to grips with those kind of changes so that we end up as better managers of customers' expectations. And that is the essence of services marketing. We also have another objective, and that is that we should be able to project future expectations. Again, with the changes in technology and so many different techniques applied by different service providers, we've got to be sensitive to all those changes that might offer themselves, like 6 months down the road or a year down the road. This is a time frame which is not hard to project. And if you have the right feel of the market, the chances are that you can make projections for the near future. And the near future is like the 6 months to 12 months to 18 months down the road. If you are in a position to gauge all that, you are the one step ahead of the market. You may not be the one step ahead of the competition, because the competition may also be thinking on the same lines, and therefore it makes the race all the more intense, and the need for your staying ahead of the competition all the more important. Having talked about these objectives, all I can say is this list of objectives that I've just narrated is not conclusive, and it is not exhaustive. In other words, there could be other objectives that you might think of from time to time, or that might pop up the scene from time to time when you are managing your services. So depending upon the nature of the service and the nature of the organization, you may have different kinds of objectives, but there is a consensus by marketing experts that the list of objectives that I've just talked about and are the ones which are mentioned in the textbook. I'm explaining all these objectives with the help of examples and with the help of different concepts by developing linkages to the benefit of all of you. But my point is that these are the kind of objectives which are almost all-encompassing, and these are the ones which really provide different kinds of industries a pretty widespread and a wide spectrum of ground to cover in terms of marketing research when you are out to have findings to your benefit and to your customers' benefit. Now, you can also argue that these are the kind of objectives which are very similar to those of tangible goods marketing. I would say yes, they are, because when you are into tangible goods marketing, your objectives are not very far from what I've talked about. There are certain subtle changes, and there are certain additional elements to these objectives which you may not find as pressing as they are here, meaning in services marketing, and those additions are to be talked about. And again, I will like to rub in that these additions occur because of the very critical variable of people in services marketing. That is one P that you must not forget. And you will recall that that P represents not just the providers, it is the people. And people could be, in addition to the providers, customers and other customers who are also present at the facility while you as a customer are buying a particular service. So it is the interplay of all those people that makes this variable so very important, critical, and sensitive that we cannot lose sight of it. And therefore, it offers itself as an additional element when it comes to looking into these objectives of services marketing. Why? Because, like I said, in terms of one of the objectives, you have to analyze performance of people all the time. The performance of people, experts contend, is to be gauged and assessed at the individual level, meaning not only the individual level, but also at the branch level, at the division level, and then at the overall company level. Maybe when I was talking about the explanation to this particular objective, I was referring to the company, but the fact is we have to analyze the performance of every individual, and perhaps that's what I talked about, every individual, and we have to look into the performance of every division, every branch, and then the overall company, because it is a collection of the accumulated behavior on part of the providers who are the frontline people, who are sitting behind the frontline people, and who are the ones who are making all these strategic formulations in order for the frontline people to be able to deliver the service of the quality which the customers expect and want. So that is the essence of all this. The other additional element is that of processes. The processes have got to be documented. They've got to be documented because we do not really want any unwarranted variability creeping into the system. It is the unwarranted variability that really makes us look unnecessarily into the face of unwanted challenges. And therefore, we've got to see to it that it only is the minimal or the inevitable level of variability that we are dealing with. And the reason I'm saying all this is because variability just cannot be 100% eliminated. No company, no procedure, and no process is immune from variability. So because of services not being variability proof, we've got to document all these processes in order to come up with a standardized kind of a service delivery mechanism. So this is something which really sets services apart from the tangible goods when it comes to fulfilling objectives. The other element that we have to be very sensitive about is a continual monitoring of the gap between expectations and the perceptions of our customers. And again, I would say that this is a very macro kind of a thing, and it is the essence of the whole course. But nevertheless, we have to talk about this gap in terms of the causes of this gap. And we have to look at three different areas from a research perspective. Don't forget that we are talking about marketing research as it carries its importance in relation to minimizing or closing gap number one. So the causes that we should be looking into in relation to the gap are deterioration of service standards, decline, and variation in demand pattern. And the third cause could be changes in expectations. And let me give you the brief description of all these causes. Well, the first one is a decline in the service standards that points our fingers towards the delivery mechanism. And we've got to look into why is it that our standards are declining, if they are declining. And if it is an HR problem, meaning we do not have the right people, then we've got to do something about it to make corrections. And that takes us into another strategic area of HR. Another cause could be variation in demand, and that takes us back to the demand equilibrium, which I talked about in relation to peak periods and slack periods. You will recall that during peak periods, providers like to capitalize on all the opportunities that are there to be cashed in, and therefore have a tendency to compromise the delivery mechanism and hence quality of service. Now, this is what really sets the very good companies apart from those which are not very good. And if we really want to make sure that we are a good company, we've got to carry out marketing research from time to time in order to make sure that we do not compromise delivery mechanism even when we happen to be in peak season. And we should not be scared about the slack season because we have to have certain strategic moves in our bag in order to face that period. The compromising of quality is unpardonable under any circumstances. The third possible cause of this gap could be the changing expectations. And changing expectations owe to competition and the competitive forces. Because of the intense competition in the market, the benchmarks of the different providers keep changing. Any good provider of services likes to change his own benchmarks. And this takes us back into the area of the zone of tolerance. And with the help of this linkage, I'm trying to explain to you, I'm trying to refresh your memory of the concept that the good providers have got to be able to operate within a narrow zone so that they are close to the level of desirability and as much away from the adequate level of service as possible. Meaning they should not be close to the adequate level of service, which is the minimum level of service. So because of this particular factor that many providers are striving hard to be close to the level of desirability, the benchmarks are changing, and that is changing expectations of customers. They are becoming more and more fastidious, and they discriminate among different providers, and they like to go to the one or the ones who really satisfy them, and not only satisfy them, but who also have the ability of making them loyal. Meaning the delivery of the service happens in such a beautiful way that they do not like to part ways with the company. they stay back and spend more with that particular company. So these could be the possible three causes of the gap that exists between expectations and perceptions, and the marketing research is all about minimizing this particular gap. And the only way to minimize this gap is to first accurately understand the underpinnings of it, the underlying forces which are creating this gap. And in order to break those into a very small kind of level, short of breaking the whole thing into a nuclear level, you should try to get to the bottom of it, you see, and then determine what could be the reasons of this particular gap. And the chances are that you will put yourself on the right strategic path. This takes us into the area of what should be the criteria for the marketing research. Before we start talking and about the different kinds of research studies that we can conduct from time to time, I think our understanding, or rather the need for our understanding about a good criteria for a good research program has got to be understood on its merit. The fact is that according to experts, we have to have, as providers of course, a complete marketing research program. They contend that marketing research which is carried out in isolation, or you see as a single episode, is not the right kind of research. It has to be a composite program. And a composite program is the one which consists of so many different marketing research studies which are aimed at giving us results that we need to have for good measurement strategies. So to say this in very simple and few words, the marketing research program is a composite of so many different studies to get to the bottom of the right measurement strategies. Now, measurement strategies is something to be underlined because we are measuring something all the time in services. Therefore, most of the strategies that we deal with are in the area of measurement. We measure the response of the customers. We measure the level of expectation. We measure the level of gap. We measure the level of satisfaction, and before that, quality, and so on and so forth. Therefore, we are dealing basically with measurement strategies, and the significance of measurement strategies make it extremely important that we get into so many different facets of customer requirement when it comes to marketing research. And that is why we need to have so many different studies, and all those studies put together make a marketing program. But before that the program takes shape, or I start talking about different kinds of studies or different elements of studies, let us talk about the criteria that we must be dealing with before we come up with a program, meaning different studies. Well, the first criterion is that a good research program must include both qualitative and quantitative research. The second one is that it must include both expectations and perceptions, for the simple reason that we have to evaluate and to compare the two against each other, and only then we can come up with the right gap. And why is there a need for this? I'll be talking about that later, because logically it becomes self-evident and self-explanatory that we have to have both exceptions and perceptions as part of our study. So this is a very important kind of a criterion that we must consider before we proceed with our studies. Good program must also balance the cost of research and the value of information. And I'll be talking about this in detail in a moment. The fourth criterion is that it must rationalize the research sample. We have to have a sample which is without any biases. Details a little later. A good research program must also be able to measure priorities and importance on part of the customers, meaning that we must not make any guesses as the service providers. And a good program is the one which occurs with appropriate frequency, the meaning that we have to undertake the program over and over again, and it has to be a kind of a perpetual effort on part of marketing providers. It must also include the measure of loyalty and behavioral intentions on part of the customers. Meaning, if customers are satisfied customers, what is the direction they're going to take in favor of the company? And in case they happen to be otherwise, what is the direction they will be taking? And I think that's very obvious. Let us now talk about these criteria one by one. The first one, you see that a good marketing research program must include both qualitative and quantitative research. Again, is very self-explanatory, because I assume that you people are very well conversant with qualitative and quantitative research methods. But to your benefit, in order to refresh up your knowledge of research, let me say a few words about quantitative and qualitative research. And I'll start with qualitative, because that is something which must take precedence over quantitative research. Qualitative research is the one which basically is concerned about defining one particular problem or one particular area that you want to deal with. And it happens to be very elementary and exploratory in nature. Because it is the definition of the problem, it keeps you concentrated on the customer in an informal way. You carry out qualitative research by way of having informal conversations with your customers, and by way of having focus groups into your office and talk about the certain problems or certain concepts that you want to initiate. And after having defined those, then you like to go ahead with quantitative research, not immediately, but after you're all set, and doing business on a daily routine basis. I'll tell you why. And you also get into things like critical incident techniques. I think it is so very refresh in our minds that there's no possibility of our losing sight of this particular concept, because this is the one which really helps us as providers trace the causes of satisfaction and also dissatisfaction. And therefore, this is something that we can use as part of the qualitative research. Quantitative research is the one which builds on qualitativeness of the research. After we have defined the problem, we like to get into different facets, like I've been talking about so many different factors of customers' requirements during the lecture, that you like to measure why customer is buying your service if he's buying over and over again. You must know that. And you must also know the percentage of those customers who are so many times more willing to come back to the company than those who are so many times less likely to come back to the company and buy your service repeatedly. So you get into all those the quantitative things which really helps you make further decisions about your future, the way of doing business. It is no longer definition of a problem. The problem is already defined, meaning you have defined the area in which you want to operate. And therefore, with the help of the quantitative research, what providers can do, look into things like what are the features customers would like to view in our service product, and what is the delivery mechanism they would like to see in place, and what are the attributes of the overall service which customers prefer. By looking into the results of the quantitative research, providers can make broad inferences about the level of quality, about the level of satisfaction, and about the level of loyalty. And let me try to give you examples in order to explain what qualitativeness is all about and what quantitativeness is all about. Well, an insurance company trying to find out whether its customers would prefer companies or products positioning more in terms of the yearly premium or settlement of claim, you have to take that up with a focus group in a qualitative manner. What you can do is you can get into contact with not just one focus group, but rather with so many different focus groups comprising of so many different segments of the captive market that you have as an insurance company. And after you have identified the motivation behind what customers think should be the case, then you go for establishing that particular position. And in other words, what you've done is you have defined the problem. And after you have defined the problem, you get into the quantitative side of that. Let me give you another example of the qualitative research. Just look at a chain of fast food restaurants that is wanting to find out the feasibility of adding a drive-through facility at one of the restaurants in one of the geographical areas. Now, this is something which the company should find out qualitatively by talking with its customers, by talking with focus groups, and the chances are that the focus group may reveal to the company that the importance of a drive-through window in that particular area is outweighed by the importance of expanding this certain area. The meaning the customers of that particular restaurant want the restaurant to expand so that it can take more and more of them, meaning customers, instead of having a drive-through window, because people of that area do not care too much about the drive-through. And they are more concerned about coming to the restaurant, sitting there, enjoying the environment, meaning the physical evidence, and that is the definition of this particular problem. After you have defined this problem, you can then get into the quantitative side of it, trying to find out what really is it that satisfies your customers, the same customers who wanted to have a greater sit-in area. What is it that really satisfies them in terms of the food quality, or in terms of the service quality, in terms of the interaction, encounters, and the overall quality of all those encounters? So just look at the dynamics, that may change with the change of the definition of the problem which you ascertained with the help of qualitative research. Qualitative research must precede quantitative research, and quantitative research is the one that gives you all the results, because you have a broad data of customers, and you can then analyze and make inferences about all those factors that we are well conversant with by now. So the essence of this particular criterion is that both qualitative and quantitative research should be a part of the program that we initiate, or a particular study with which we initiate as part of the overall marketing research program. The second criterion is that a good marketing program should include both expectations and perceptions. And this is the one which I said is self-evident, because it goes without saying that the logic dictates that both the factors have got to be taken into consideration while we are carrying out research about these two vital factors. But the fact is that not many companies do it. And that is why the experts talk about the significance of this inclusion by way of having both expectations and perceptions into your study. What generally happens is that people talk about perceptions, the meaning providers talk about all those questions that relate their levels of expectations and all those related variables that relate perceptions, and they do not talk about expectations. So what happens is that the results that you have about the experiences of your customers are not comparable with the expectations which they had before they bought the service. So in the absence of that comparison, the experts argue, meaning detractors of this particular criterion argue that it is not the right comparison in the absence of expectations, and therefore we've got to have both expectations and perceptions in place. Why do they say that? They say that by contending that if customers are highly satisfied, they may rate their expectations on a lower side by saying, well, we came to the facility to buy the service and we are pleasantly surprised, and the service has delighted us so much that the expectations were really low, and the delivery really has exceeded that level of expectation. So here those experts contend that the relationship between expectations and the perceptions may not be correct. If we talk about expectations later, the meaning when we have already had the results of the perceptions. And also say that when customers are dissatisfied, they may say that they came to the company with very high expectations, and sorry, we are disappointed. We are thoroughly frustrated because the level of expectations that we had, given the background of this particular company, was very high. And at the end of the day, we are totally caught up, and we're not going to come back to the company to buy the service. So because of the relationship, which is kind of very lopsided and which is very inverse, as a matter of fact, and this is something which takes us back to the grid, which I explained to you once in one of the previous lectures about this inverse relationship between expectations and satisfaction, that when you have low expectations, you might end up as a very highly satisfied customer, and vice versa. Without getting into the details of that grid, let me talk about some other experts who further argue that when we have expectations as part of the research design, the meaning when we include expectations along with perceptions, we can come up with a mechanism that can eliminate the built-in bias. And that bias is reflected by way of the concept that I just talked about, meaning the inverse relationship. How do we eliminate that bias? Well, experts contend that we go for that elimination if we carry out some kind of qualitative research before the quantitative research, and in that qualitative research, we capture the expectations of our customers before we go ahead with the quantitative research. So once we have captured the level of expectations, or rather different levels of expectations of the customer will not say something to the contrary of what he already has said. And therefore, the comparison that we shall be drawing between expectations and perceptions is going to be a very realistic one. And given this realism, the findings of the research study are going to be very meaningful when we make decisions about minimizing the gap. And when we think of bringing about improvements in the delivery mechanism, in the features, attributes of our service, so that the gap stands minimized. Having talked about these two criterion out of the 7 which I listed, I would be talking about the remaining in the next lecture for the paucity of time. And before I say the goodbye and thanks to you, let me sum up what we have learned today. It basically is about the importance of marketing research program. And experts say that a marketing research program must consist of different studies because we're dealing with different facets of customers' requirements. Customers view our products, meaning service products, in so many different ways. And we've got to list all those angles and dimensions from which the customers look at our service product, and hence come up with compatible research studies. And the reason we must come up with these studies and hence an overall composite program is that services marketing is very variable, and because of the variability, we must see to it from time to time that everything is in place. We must not wait until the time that we have financial results, because by that time something may have gone so wrong that we do not have many options to correct it. We may not be in a position to stage recovery at that particular point in time. So we have to have a mechanism whereby we can test different dimensions with the help of our marketing studies. This is the lesson of today. And with this, I would like to thank all of you for your attendance and look forward to talking with you in the next lecture. Allah Hafiz until then.